Okay. I think most people are kind of trickling in. It's good to see you. My name is Robin, and I am the Director of Education for AMAZEworks. I've been with Amaze for about the past 7 years. We're just going to be kind of informal here with things that are happening and what's going on. You're welcome to put yourselves on mute. There are going to be a few times where we'll talk back and forth with each other, where we will, if you have questions, you can certainly put them in the chat. And we'll go for an hour, and then the last, from 3:30 to 4:30, and then the last 15 minutes, 4:30 to 4:45, we'll have questions if there's anything else that you want to talk about or discuss. So, Mel, are you ready to get started? And Marcella, are we ready to get started?
I am.
Yes.
Good afternoon.
With me today is Mel and Marcella. They'll introduce themselves as they come on. Once again, I'm Robin. And at AMAZEworks, we begin by acknowledging that we are bringing this webinar to you from St. Paul, Minnesota, which is Dakota land. A land acknowledgement is a formal recognition of the unique and enduring relationship that exists between Native Americans and their territories. It is important for each of us to understand the longstanding history that has brought us to reside here in the land and to seek to understand our place within that history. It's also important that we as educators, caregivers, and parents acknowledge history whenever possible in a way that can lead our young people to be empowered. If you wish to discover more about a land acknowledgement, please feel free to explore more on the website for the Native Governance Center provided in the chat. We're going to get started with a poll.
And before we do that, I just want to take a moment to introduce myself. My name is Melissa Anderson, and I use she and her pronouns. And most people in my life call me Mel, so either Melissa or Mel is totally fine. And I'm the Director of Curriculum and Instruction at AMAZEworks. I've been with AMAZEworks now for about 1.5 years, and I come to this work after being a classroom teacher for 15 years. I taught middle school language arts and social studies, and I'm excited to be here with you today. And we are going to start with a quick poll. So Marcella is going to launch our poll for us after she introduces herself. And we'll move on.
Hi, I'm Marcella. I use she, her pronouns. I am the program coordinator fellow at AMAZEworks this year. I'm doing a fellowship program, so I'm actually just here until the end of July. But yeah, yeah, so I'm gonna launch this poll.
So you should see a poll with a question: during the past year, what has brought the most change in your family's life? And you can choose one or more answers. You can choose all 4 if you'd like. And we'll actually discuss the poll a little bit later, but we're just gathering that right now. And it's something for you to think about.
Great. So Marcella, as other people join us, you can welcome them in the chat, and then you can give them that poll and ask them to take it so that we can get everybody's voice. And I'll kind of get started here. So at AMAZEworks, we understand that COVID-19, in addition to that murder of the murder of George Floyd in Minneapolis by a police officer, has highlighted inequities in our nation and in our world and the state in new and unprecedented ways. And so we're bringing these webinars to you, a series of 3, in recognition that you're coming to this space with your own lived experiences. We hope to provide for you a windows and mirrors approach, so you can see yourself reflected in some of the things that we share and discuss, and that you can have an openness with curiosity to discover new insights and perspectives. For people of color and those joining us with marginalized identities, we wish to provide with you an opportunity for solidarity and support to help you navigate some of the social and emotional work that can be done by all of us to strengthen equity and belonging for all. Now, as white women here today, Marcella, Mel, and I, we feel that it's really important for us to understand the longstanding history that's brought us to reside here during this racial justice movement. And we at AMAZEworks seek to understand our place within that history, and we encourage others to do the same. The world we currently live in has a great deal of uncertainty, or as of late. So many changes have happened, and this webinar we hope will offer you a space to reflect, to breathe, to discuss ways in which we can support our children as well as ourselves during these times of change. So to create a common language, we use the William Bridges transition model as a way of having discussions, being able to name the endings. This helps us to see the change as a date that we can put on the calendar. It's the time that we spend in the neutral zone that is a process for creating steps or finding new ways to lead us through what can be a new beginning. So this is the letting go that we refer to in our title. There are many things that have happened in the past that are beyond our control. And so we're in the present, and if we let go, it can help us to create healthy hearts, minds, and bodies so that we're able to create new beginnings. So here's an example of what I mean by that. So in the beginning of the year, school started in distance or hybrid learning, depending on the Department of Health stats and what your district said it was going to be. And that was September 2020. Then election day came where there was voting, November 3rd, 2020, another part of change that happened in our world. And then the holiday shutdowns, and then openings, and then shutdowns, and then now we're experiencing some openings. November and December 2020 is when that happened. And for us, all of that can be like a tornado, one thing after another. Or it doesn't necessarily have to be that way. If we can focus on what happens in the neutral zone with a positive mindset, we can create resiliency for ourselves and those who we care for as a way of beginning this journey. Now, questions for reflection are one of the tools that we use at AMAZEworks to help us know where we've been and look at where we're going and be aware of how we can move forward. And so if you could please reflect in silence without sharing as we ask you these questions. How did you learn about or experience grief and loss as a child? How did you express your grief? And how has that shaped your experiences as an adult? I'm going to give you a minute to just think about that and reflect. Okay, that's been about a minute. I thank you for reflecting, and we're going to continue on. See, throughout last year, many of you may have heard the word trauma. And yes, there has been traumatic events that have happened, and it's important for us to name those events and the emotions that we experience while going through that time as a way of validating those experiences and recognizing the grief and loss we may have experienced. There's a new way for framing trauma in neuroscientific research. They call it post-traumatic growth opportunity and resiliency. In this picture, it kind of describes for me what that is. It's that rainbow. I love the rainbow because it's both and. It shows us that turmoil, kind of like the storm we had last night. But it also reminds us that there's positive things ahead. And so as someone who has experienced PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, I don't want to minimize or reduce someone else's experience. But when I experience a trigger, I have a therapist that I can talk with. I have different things that I've learned along the way that are exercises that I can do to kind of calm myself down. One that I like to do often is to cross my arms and just kind of squeeze and breathe. That's a good one to do. And so being able to focus on family and friends who can help you, and your therapist is great. But we're not going to be talking about PTSD today because we want to be able to give an opportunity for us instead to talk about endings and the neutral zone and transitions to this new beginning we experience with our children, with ourselves, and how we take these transitions and changes from our most recent past and possibly from a negative experience to a post-traumatic growth opportunity experience. A term coined by Richard Tedeschi and Lawrence Calhoun, they put forth that people who endure psychological struggle following adversity can oftentimes see positive growth afterwards. And one of the things that they've discovered is that there are 4 different types of resiliencies and strengths that can contribute to such growth. There's emotional resilience, social resilience, mental resilience, and physical resilience. These are scientifically validated activities that you can do every day in order to foster a positive mindset and build up your resiliencies. We'll give you some suggestions throughout our time together that you can do for yourself, and then with your children as well. The benefit is a positive psychological change that you can experience when there's been adversity or challenges. And we do this in order to raise ourselves to a higher level of understanding for positive growth during difficult times.
So we're going to start with one of those activities, and we're going to start with an emotional resilience activity. So here's an activity that you can do to tap into that emotional resilience that you have. And you can do this anytime. If you have a device nearby, do a quick YouTube or Google image search for your favorite animal, the baby of your favorite animal, for example, a kitten or a baby elephant. When you spend time watching videos of your favorite baby animal or looking at images, you will likely feel powerful, positive emotions like curiosity and love. And it may seem silly to do that, but there's actually those emotions happening in your brain, which can help you when you most need it. When I was a middle school teacher, I always had a welcome message projected for my students when they would come into my classroom. And they loved it when my slides included a picture of my dog Barley, who I talked about a lot because he's a perpetual puppy, even though he's 5.5 years old. But that's kind of one example of, how when you're feeling what you're feeling after viewing these types of images. Oftentimes it's joy, and you might find yourself smiling or giggling or reflecting, and that's tapping into that emotional resilience. And here's a little secret for you that comes from brain science. You can manage to experience 3 positive emotions for every 1 negative emotion over the course of an hour or a day or a week. You can dramatically improve your health, and it improves your ability to tackle problems you're facing. And this is called the 3-to-1 positive emotion ratio. What it does is it helps your brain release dopamine, which is a helpful chemical that helps you fight stress. And so to flip that switch from looking at negatives we experience when a change occurs, we can look at what neuroscience tells us about the brain and stress. Deep within the brain, there's this area called the limbic region. And this contains an arrangement of structures that process our emotions, our feelings. The amygdala is one of these structures within that feelings region of the brain. And we're going to show you a little video. It's about 2 minutes long that describes what happens in this region, this limbic region of the brain, and how it affects the rest of our brain's functions.
When we hear the word emotion, most of us think of love, hate, happiness, or fear. Those strong feelings we experience throughout life. Our emotions are the driving force behind many of our behaviors, helpful and unhelpful. Just where do our emotions come from? Our brain is wired to look for threats or rewards. If one is detected, the feeling region of the brain alerts us through the release of chemical messages. Emotions are the effect of these chemical messages traveling from our brain through the body.
Sorry.
That's okay.
Behaviors, helpful and unhelpful. Just where do our emotions come from? Our brain is wired to look for threats or rewards. If one is detected, the feeling region of the brain alerts us through the release of chemical messages. Emotions are the effect of these chemical messages traveling from our brain through the body. When our brain detects a potential threat, our brain releases the stress hormones adrenaline and cortisol, which prepare us for a fight or flight response. When we detect or experience something rewarding, such as someone doing something nice for you, our brain releases dopamine, oxytocin, or serotonin. These are the chemicals that make us feel good and motivate us to continue on the task or behavior. In these instances, the feeling region of the brain kicks in before the thinking part. Sometimes the reactions of the feeling brain are so strong that it dominates our behaviors. We're unable to think rationally in the moment. Our emotions hijack our brain. While many of our emotional responses happen subconsciously, our thinking can influence our emotions, and sometimes this can be unhelpful. Just thinking about something threatening can trigger an emotional response. This is where we can manage our emotions with conscious thinking. Our emotions play a powerful role in the way we experience the world. Understanding and regulating our emotions through our thoughts and behaviors can help us take greater control of our brain and achieve our goals.
Great. So, as we do this webinar and the next 2 webinars, we'll be talking about that brain science information a little bit more. Knowing and naming your emotions is a great asset for children to be able to do. If we can see, feel when we are in times of overwhelming stress and be able to name it, it's very helpful. You might notice that sometimes when that happens, we're in self-doubt. It can creep into our thoughts. Brene Brown suggests that we ask ourselves, what is the story I'm telling myself? For my children, I used to ask them when I saw them being a bit overwhelmed, what is this thinking that you're saying inside your brain right now? What's going on? And my children oftentimes would answer with, oh, I don't understand this, or I don't get this. This is too hard for me. You're a teacher, you wouldn't understand. So all of us experience that kind of stinking thinking. Mel, what's the story you tell yourself?
Yeah, so my panic when my brain is in that stress response mode, it's often self-doubt talk. So I would think like, I can't do this, or why can't I do this? Or I bet someone else could do this better. What's wrong with me? And that might ring true for some of you as well. And we're going to take a moment now actually to look at the results of the poll that we took at the beginning. You know, during the past year, what has brought the most change in your family's life? And I'm not able to actually see the results of the poll. So Robin, if you can help me out with that. But as we look at the results, something to think about is, you know, during these times of change, what is the story you tell yourself? You know, in those times of change and stress, what is the story that you've told yourself in these moments?
Yeah, and so during now, it seems a lot of us are experiencing a very similar thing. It's that combination of world and national events that create some uncertainty for us. 75% of you say it's home life because there's been some switches, and work life. I know for me, I had a bumpy road in the beginning when it came to being able to navigate working from home, doing a 40-hour week, but then managing the things that were going on in my home life here. And so if we take a look at that as a tornado or a negative thing that's in our life, those changes, that 75% that we saw on our poll, it might give us that self-doubt and that we put ourselves in. And so what we're going to ask today is that from this point on, how might you be able to reflect back on that past, or in the future, look at a different visual instead of a tornado and stress? Look at it as though it were, say, a marathon. Now, I would never run a marathon. I have short little legs, and it's just not a thing that I do. But I do have a best friend who has run a marathon, and she's told me what it takes to do that. And so if you can envision giving yourself in any situation the opportunity to be able to look at, okay, what do I need to do during this change? An ending has happened. What is the diet that I need to do? What physically should I make happen, exercise of some kind, so that I can keep myself in a place where I'm not overwhelmed by my stress, or I'm not overwhelmed by my stinking thinking. What's the community that you can create for yourself so that you're not in a position of feeling alone or isolated? So Marcella, you can go ahead and switch to the next slide. If we were to put this into that transitions model that we were talking about, it would look like this. No matter what the situation is, if my metaphor is, okay, I'm going to do this training, and then it's the 5K, and then it's the 10K, and then it's the half marathon, and of celebrations along the way, and then the first marathon, you can get to that new beginning with that positive mindset that we're kind of talking about. So we're going to give a couple of different examples of not an actual marathon, but that metaphoric way of handling these transitions when there's uncertainty in our world, and looking at what are the little goals of success in the neutral zone that we can create for ourselves and our children so that we're experiencing growth opportunities. When using that marathon metaphor, it's a way of reminding us that physical resilience is really important. And when we experience change, we're going to look at what are the steps we can add. Go ahead, Mel.
Yeah, and so, you know, the last thing we talked about was a way to tap into your emotional resilience, but that physical resilience is also really, really important. One of the most important things we can do is move our bodies. And you know, that becomes tough for some of us, especially during the winter here in Minnesota. But this is a stress reducer. I'm gonna do another little activity with you. Hopefully you will join me. I'm gonna ask you to put your hands, make your hands into fists and raise them up over your head as high as you can, and pump your arms, trying to reach higher and higher with each pump as you go. And we're gonna count to 10, starting now. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. You can keep going if you want to, but I'm gonna stop. But that physical resilience, taking time each day and taking multiple times throughout the day to move your body, even if it's just as simple as sitting in your chair and doing that. But having that physical resilience means that your body can withstand more stress and it will heal itself faster. I was noticing that I needed to build in some more physical resilience into my week working from home, and I'd been sick this last year, and needed to really focus more on my body and my health. And one thing that my partner Darren and I started doing at the start of January is holding Friday dance parties at 5:00 p.m. So it was our like, it's 5:00, it's Friday, we're gonna walk away from the computers, and each of us would pick a song and we would just dance for 10 minutes. And it's amazing what that will do as a way to just shift your thinking from like that stressful work week, all the things that were happening for that, and then a way to create some fun and physical movements to begin our weekend and shift our brains away from work and all that came with it. So if anybody wants to try that, tomorrow's Friday. Do it.
Do the
I know I'm going to be doing it. I already have my song picked out for the week.
Right. If anyone has given a suggestion of what they've been doing for either emotional resilience or physical resilience in the chat, would you be able to read that now, Mel?
Yeah, I will. There's Brittany says, I've been trying the 28-2 approach with online courses this semester. For every 30 minutes of work time, 20 minutes of sitting, 8 minutes of standing, 2 minutes of moving and stretching.
Nice.
Yeah, that's a great one. I hope that's working well for you. But yeah, the goal is to not sit still, right? Every single time, every single second that you're not sitting, you're improving your health. You're improving the health of your heart, your lungs, and also your brain. So yeah, keep it coming in the chat. What are some things that you can do to practice physical resilience? And maybe what's one thing that you can commit to doing to practice physical resilience within the next 3 days? If we think about between now and the end of the weekend, what's one thing that you could commit to and share it with us? We've got Melissa says Nordic walking and Pilates. And the students seem to appreciate this approach, and it helps me be creative with the standing and moving activities to connect with them. Oh yes, anytime you can connect class content to movement is super helpful. You'll definitely grab students' attention. Brittany says, one activity was walking outside to find an item that made them think of a children's book. I love it. So if anyone else has a commitment to physical resilience that they can practice within the next 3 days, please share it with us in the chat.
So I'm going to just kind of move on. One of the reasons physical resilience is so important is because it can help us to shift during those times when we feel that we're stuck. And in his book, Control Theory, William Glasser says, it only appears that we behave in response to extreme threats or positive reinforcement. And so we're going to take a look at why we behave. And we behave to avoid something or to get something. And so for us as caregivers, when our children and teens are struggling to get their basic needs met, well, then it can take away a little bit from us being able to get our own needs met. And so for us as parents, what we want to do is taking a look at that chair as the basic needs are belonging, fun, freedom, and power, safety and survival is that solid place. And so if that's not happening for us, we don't have a stable ground. And so the image that might happen would be this next one where our needs aren't being met. During this pandemic, my belonging need was cut off and I had very little just because of health concerns. My success I didn't feel as successful as I usually did. I did have fun. We found ways to make it fun at home, but my freedom need, for many people as well, was really cut off. And so when we struggle to get our needs met, we can parent our children in a way that just might create conflict or more chaos. And in control theory, there are 5 different positions of control that William Glasser talks about. He talks about a punisher, filter, buddy, manager, monitor. And when it comes to my jobs that I've had throughout my life, I've had bosses who've led by one of those positions of control. As a student, I can recall having some teachers who led from one of those positions of control. And that punisher, filter, buddy way of being creates behaviors that are motivated by mostly intrinsic motivation, that outward kind of reason for a reward, money, fame, grades, praise from others, or maybe to avoid fear of something. If overwhelmed, we may just respond as though we're on automatic pilot, and we find ourselves behaving from a place of a stress response, that fight, flight, freeze mode. And so if a parent is in a fight mode, we may be parenting from a punisher position. Things that we might say would be, if you don't do it, I'll, or there's yelling and pointing that's going on, or it's go to your room. When an adult is in a punisher mode, the child is going to behave to avoid punishment. For children, we will choose to conform to what children are going to, choose to conform to what's being asked of them. And if it's a punisher who they more frequently are hearing from, it's going to happen that there are going to be fewer things that they're going to share with us. And finally, they're going to resist. And that's the one thing that they might do, is just resist all the time. So if we're stressed and we're hollering and we're punishing a lot, then children have this fear and resentment and anger and vindictiveness and grudging conformity. Now, this isn't where we're always at, but we just want you to be aware of it. The legacy of a guilter is one where they oftentimes will hide and kids will deny. And so a buddy is going to come from a position of control where they say, do it for me. And the legacy there is that there's this dependency on adults, and there is an internal motivation. The hope is that we can eventually lead as parents from a manager-monitor mode of control, striving for internal motivation from our kids and for ourselves. That intrinsic motivation is when we engage in behavior because it's personally rewarding for us, not an external motivation. For adults, it means being more of that manager to set the routine for our kids, give them a chance to know what's expected, how they can do it, and then creating with them what that timeline is so that we can manage how things are going for them. So let's take a typical clean your room example. We set the expectations, demonstrate and guide what the expectation needs to be, and then our children can eventually complete the task and problem solve on their own. This is how my folks did it with me as a kid, and then I did it with my children. Although I did have sometimes in the punisher mode, when I crossed the bottom line and got into a fight with my brother, I would be sent to my room. But during other times, even when my parents were stressed, or even when I was stressed as an adult, what I would try and think of was this transitions model, creating a routine together, agreeing on the timeline on how we can get done what they want. It allowed us to manage our behavior. So when Dad would say, or I would say, Dad, can I go over to Joey's house and play? He would say, yes, if your chores are done and your room is clean. And that allowed me to be able to get the chore done or get the room clean, so that on Saturdays, eventually, it would be me saying, Dad, my chores are done and my room is clean. Can I go over to Joey's? And the answer would be, yes, if your chores are done and your room is clean. And they were done because I just told them they were. So what that happened there was that I was able to weave into monitoring and managing my own behavior dependently because of internal motivation of wanting to be able to get my work done the way we had learned how to do it, and being able to ask for what I needed, knowing that I was going to get the response that I wanted. And so whenever possible, if we're stressed, do our best to de-stress ourselves. So we're coming from that manager-monitor mode, where we can ask for what we need or have the motivation to be coming internally. Provide opportunities that helps your kids do new things with an internal motivation that guides them to manage and monitor their own behaviors. There's no hierarchy or blame or shame with 5 positions of control. Glasser says that we have our beliefs in our family, and that guiding the bottom line is great. But if we have a situation where we say the bottom line is be nice, no hitting, then you'll get sent to your room if you don't. Well, yes, that's punishing, but it's not punishing in a place of stress. It's punishing in a natural consequence kind of way. If you're choosing to be mean and hitting, that bottom line has been crossed and you'll be sent to your room. But when you do it, state it in a neutral tone if you can. When we've taught and modeled the behavior that we want to see, we navigate transitions and new beginnings, and we create responses that are based on external motivation or internal motivation, depending on what our need is that needs to get met. And guiding to internal motivation and eventually independence with our kids is what we're oftentimes hoping for. So Mel,
Yeah.
what's another social resilience activity we could do?
Yeah, so that was the next thing is talking about social resilience. And so we talked about physical and emotional resilience. And many of us have had to work extremely hard over the last year to practice social resilience because of, distancing and all of that. So social resilience is the ability to connect with other people, right? You can get strength from connecting with others through your friends, your neighbors, your family, your communities. And an important way to give and receive this energy is through touch, like handshakes or hugs. And those are excellent ways to give and receive energy from others, and that's been difficult to do. But another way to receive this energy is to communicate gratitude to those you care about. And so if you communicate gratitude, it can be a really powerful way to boost your social resilience, especially when you can't be in person with someone and give them a hug. And so it helps, boost your social resilience, but then also those that you're giving gratitude to. And so, since we're still living through a global pandemic and social distancing, maybe try sending 3 people a quick appreciation or thank you by text, email, or social media, or maybe handwrite them a note or card. In fact, I'm going to ask you right now to make a list. You can do that on a piece of scrap paper or on your phone, or maybe just write it on your hand if you want to. But try to think of at least 3 people in your life that you can commit to reaching out to within the next week and communicate your gratitude for them. So try to think of 3 people. And then later on, when you're with your children, ask them to do the same and, help them to do that reaching out if they need it, depending on their age.
When it comes to creating social resilience, it's important to have people in your life who you can create a circle of support with so that you're not alone. And at this time in history, it's like we're dealing with 2 pandemics. Globally, we're not just talking about COVID-19, we're also talking about the unjust ways in which Black and brown bodies have been treated in this country.
Yeah, and so discussing, major state, national, and world events with our children and teens is more than just, learning about what's going on. It's really about sharing stories, and that builds empathy and shifts thinking from, being our issue, instead of just thinking something is their issue. It also creates opportunities for connection to historical events, and it invites courage and curiosity to discover the entire story of our past, including those narratives that are often absent and the facts that have been left out.
It can be done by intentionally navigating our awareness of racism and the disparities that exist. If we can develop the capacity to reflect and deliberate on today's world for ourselves and our kids, well, then we're able to have the empathy and understanding needed to create the resiliency. As a white person, I have learned that if we place judgment onto events or people, we can get into a negative loop because of our biases. Our experiences and our perspectives of current events can cause stress, feeding into our lack of certainty. When it comes to continual racial oppression in our nation, naming our past behaviors or even exploring our past thoughts can help us to let go and recognize what that past was for us. And then from there, it creates an ending. Name the change and become curious about what that transition, metaphorically speaking, what that marathon of creating a new racial awareness can be, or what the actions might look like. What is the process of creating a new beginning of how we want to be? What do you want to discover and do during the present moment of racial justice movement that we're experiencing? If you don't take a stand and look to create identity safety for all, then we're going to be having kids and a world that's living in fear. And when we see oppression, it becomes like, well, it's just evident that there's equity missing, and we are experiencing, or people are experiencing, oppression during this time. We need to be responsive in a way that can build trust, because if we do nothing, it says something. And so we want to build the trust back if we can. So if we continue to build relations across differences instead of isolating and othering people, it's going to help us out. Because if we continue to have a lack of respect in our society, we're going to continue to see resistance, and an ending has happened. And a resistance that's going for equity and change for all is an important thing that needs to happen. We encourage growth and transformation to a new beginning that nurtures hope and resiliency and justice by creating the conditions for belonging wherever we can and whenever we can.
Yeah, so, discussing these major state, national, world events with our children and teens it's really about sharing stories, and this sharing of stories builds empathy. And talking about some of these things that are in the news right now can seem quite intimidating and can cause us a lot of stress. We might be afraid that we don't have all the right answers, or that we won't get it right, or we might think our children are too young, or we ourselves haven't maybe done enough of our own work around our biases. But just remember that it's okay to not have all the answers. But what's important is to have the conversations, because there are children of all ages experiencing oppression and racism every day. So all children of all ages need to be having the conversation and be part of that conversation with trusting and loving adults.
So we invite you to visit our resource hub or on our website and look at the resources as well as picture books recommended. We have lessons on our website, but these are some picture books that we oftentimes will recommend. We Are the Change is beautiful poetry. Candy Shop, Something's Happening in Our Town, and Candy Shop, we have lessons to go along with so that you can read the story with your kids and have conversations. And Intersection Ally is a great book for young and old to be able to look at, how can I have conversations if I'm not used to having conversations about race and equity? It's the anti-bias work that we do, where we're looking at healthy complex identity, respect across differences, naming and noticing bias, prejudice, and stereotypes when we see it, and taking action. That's going to help us to kind of move forward during these difficult times. Mel, I think that unless there's something else you can think of to add to what I just said, we can do another one of those resiliency things, look into some mindfulness.
Sure. So, mindfulness, well, it can help with a lot of things. So during these times of significant change and transition, our brains, they'll react with that stress response like you saw in the video. And when that happens, we're more likely to act on our biases. And, bias is a preference for or against an individual or a group, and it can definitely interfere with our judgment and perception. But mindfulness can actually be a really powerful debiasing technique. If we can remember to pause, breathe, and reflect on what's happening for us in our bodies, and then respond, This can help us interrupt our stress responses and release oxytocin in our brains, which is another helpful chemical that helps us fight stress. And one thing you can do is try a meditation. I'm going to talk about a specific meditation called a hugging meditation, which will not only help relax that amygdala, that stress part of the brain, but also help you in connecting with your children. This particular meditation is taken from the book Planting Seeds, Practicing Mindfulness with Children by Thich Nhat Hanh. And to do this meditation, it's pretty simple to remember. You just, you stand facing the person that you're with, a family member or friend, look into their eyes and bow to each other. And then you're going to give each other a hug. Hug slowly and gently. And then as you're hugging, take 3 deep breaths. And there's going to be an intention that you set as you breathe each breath. So with the first breath, focus your awareness on being alive and in the moment for yourself. And with the second breath, focus on being aware that your family member or your friend is alive and in that moment with you. To focus on being together. And with the third breath, focus on feeling happy and grateful to hold them in your arms. And then after the 3 breaths, you can let go of the hug a little bit and look at each other as you separate, and then offer each other a final bow. And so maybe try that with your children, especially if one of you is experiencing some stress. It can be a great way to interrupt that stress. And another type of resilience that we didn't talk about yet is mental resilience, which, you know, if you have more mental focus, you'll have more discipline and determination and willpower. And that willpower actually acts like a muscle, and it gets stronger the more that you use it. And so we're going to try a challenge together. I'm not sure how this is going to go, but I'm going to invite you to unmute yourself. And we are going to count backwards from 100 by 7s. So please unmute yourself and join me. And we are going to do it together. And we're going to try to visualize the numbers in your head. And it's going to make us do some mental math. And that's part of the mental resilience building. So we're going to start from 100, and it's okay. We may not all be together at the same exact point, but that's okay. And we're going to start now with 100, 93, 86,
79,
72, 65, 58. You're doing great. We're about halfway there. Don't give up.
51, 40,
44,
37, 30, 23,
16,
Yes.
9,
9,
2.
and then we'd be in the negatives. Nice job. So thanks for joining in that one. You can try that one with your kiddos too, if they're able to do that math from 100. But that's an example of, you know, how tackling just a little tiny challenge like that without giving up, even if it sounds absurd, like counting by 7s from 100. But if you do that regularly and create little challenges for yourself, it helps you chunk up big tasks into smaller little tasks. So it helps exercise your brain and gets you ready to think about things in smaller steps. So kind of like Robin said with running a marathon, that seems like a big task, right? But it helps us to think about it in smaller steps. And so by doing that, those little goals that we can create, if we can get in that mindset of thinking about things in smaller chunks, it helps us move through that transition to a new beginning.
So setting an intention. There's lots of things that we've talked about today. And so, Mel, I'm going to let you go ahead and do this.
Sure. Yeah. So yeah, there's a lot of information, but using what we've discussed today, I'm going to invite you to set an intention for yourself as you move through those transitions into new beginnings. And you can use these steps, and you can write it down if you would like. But to start with, on the upper left-hand corner, are my thoughts. What are the things on my mind? What am I thinking about a lot? You can then think about a goal for the day. What's, one thing I want to accomplish? Thinking about, just let's take the first step. And then to practice that, those different resiliences. My want for someone else, that social resilience. What is a wish I have today for another person in my life? My strengths. What's something I'm good at that can help me with my goal or to help me get through? It's important for us to think about our strengths regularly. My support plan is how will I support and take care of myself today? And really think about how you'll take care of yourself. And then think about, when is a time that you can revisit your thoughts? So when will I take time to revisit the things on my mind that I wrote about at first? And then thinking about all of that, what's an appropriate intention to focus on based on what you already said or wrote or thought about? And you can try this building an intention anytime, this chunking it out into smaller pieces and putting in some of those different resilience skills. And you can do this with your children as well. And depending on their age, you may need to modify it a little bit, or maybe put it in pictures for them, depending on how young they are. But to get them to think about each of these steps and building their own intentions.
Yeah. So uncertainty, change, and even traumatic events do not have to doom us to suffer indefinitely or create a tornado for us. There can be a benefit to letting go, to embrace the growth opportunities, such as making it through transitions and change to new beginning with resilience. It can be a springboard to unleash our best qualities and live better, stronger lives. According to Kelly McGonigal in her book, The Upside of Stress, she and her team did research around longitudinal studies that followed survivors of PTSD who then were experiencing post-traumatic stress disorder, and looked at why it was that they were coming out in such a positive way, even though they had lived through such difficult times. And this is where they began to look at, wow, they really experienced post-traumatic growth. And the 5 things that they mentioned they were thinking of as far as intentions in their life was that my priorities have changed and I'm not afraid to do what makes me happy anymore. They also had an outlook that said, I'm closer to my friends and family. I understand myself better and I know who I really am now. I have a new sense of meaning and purpose, and I'm better able to focus on my goals and dreams. So for me, after I recently watched the TED Talk that Kelly McGonigal had given in 2014, and she was talking about these 5 different things that are listed there from people who experience traumatic growth. For me, I thought, well, this is really kind of cool, because I hear a lot of people when I ask them, how you doing? And they tell me how they've been in this past year. And during these 2 pandemics that we've been experiencing, those pandemics haven't really been too hard hitting for them because they're very similar here. They're talking about spending time with family, they have priorities, and they have that positive mindset in moving forward. And so one of the things that we'd love to leave you with is for you to think about being aware of the stress responses and when those events happen and how it occurs, and be able to share stories to keep the conversation going about racial justice and how it's long overdue. Reframe your endings so that what happens for you when there is an ending can be a navigation of the neutral zone. So it's positive and there's understanding for you on how the brain works and what those 4 resiliencies are for you so that you can help get through. And to be mindful of what's the position of control that you're in. so that you're weaving in and out of that manager monitor mode and able to focus on the positive with your kids, teaching them how to be internally motivated.
Yeah, and really the thing to remember is that, you know, this is a journey, and it's a winding road. And this is, you know, in some ways just the start. So we hope that you can join us next week on March 18th and then the following week on the 25th. So we can continue the conversation. We'll talk about how to handle some of the roadblocks along the way. Nice metaphor, right? Including how we can navigate our children's unwanted negative behaviors, reduce conflict, and respond better to our children's needs. And until then, just, you know, try as much as you can to focus on something that makes you happy, or focus on what gets you physically more active to build that physical resilience. Do something to put yourself in touch with someone you care about. Try to tackle a tiny challenge. And you are going to boost your resilience by doing those things. And you'll be able to let go so you and your children can grow from those stressors that you've experienced from the last year, and help with that, creating that circle of support. And so we will move into a little time for questions, but I just want to make sure to tell you to sign up for our monthly e-newsletter and follow us on social media. And you can put your email in the chat to sign up for our monthly e-newsletter. Otherwise, there is a QR code on your screen if you're really savvy and you want to try to grab that to go to our sign up page. Otherwise, it's a great resource. We send out, you know, free lessons and book recommendations and other resources every single month. On
our website, there's the resource hub. And so you can take a look at the resource hub. We have currently put in there supporting children during the Derek Chauvin trial and other resources. I would highly recommend just looking around at the other links that you can go to that we've looked at and we highly recommend as places to give you support and help when it comes to navigating conversations with your kids. So thank you for sharing your time with us today. We hope to see you at our next 2 webinars, and what are the conversations or chats or questions you have about what we've discussed so far today. Anything in the chat that you want to read out loud, Mel?
We don't have anything in the chat right now, just things that Marcella has been sharing, the sign up for the newsletter and then the link to our resource hub.
Okay.
And we have a thank you, but.
There you go. A lot of stuff packed in an hour, but I hope we've been able to give you a little frame of reference on how to just kind of flip the switch a little bit in de-escalating some of that stress and anxiety by doing those 4 different things that we talked about, getting physical resiliency happening. You can unmute yourself and just ask us out loud if you have any wonderings or questions. Definitely. This relates to my caregiver responsibility of my elderly mother. Definitely true. You know, I heard a really great thing on public radio. A comedian was talking about caring for her father who had Alzheimer's. And one of the things that her therapist had shared with her was, you're a comedian. Look at it as though you're doing improv and just go with the flow of what that person is saying and try and find comedy. Because if you can find some comedy with that person you're taking care of, it's going to lighten your stress and your frustration and your grief and loss, that things aren't the way that they used to be. And I found that as a caregiver myself, I found that to be very helpful. When caring for someone, find places to giggle and find ways to be physically active so that I have enough energy to be able to give to this other person.
We use humor all the time.
Good, good,
And
good.
I'm happy to say that my mother and I have the same sense of humor, so that really helps a lot.
That does help. Yeah, definitely.
Thank you so much.
Definitely. Any other questions?
I didn't realize I was unmuted. I just heard a crash though, so I'm gonna go make sure everyone's
You go
okay.
see what it is.
I'm
and-
planning to be on next week. Thank you.
Good,
Thanks,
good. Yes,
everyone.
thank you. Bye. Okay. Any other questions about control theory and the transitions model?
No, thank you for your time today.
Yeah.
See you next week.
See you. Thank you.
Yeah, enjoy the week, everyone.
You as well.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Deborah.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah, it was fun. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us.
You're wonderful.
Keep smiling.